all of the embroidery is finished, and the next step is to put on the rickrack. So there's enough rickrack in one of these containers. There's 2.5 yards, I think, that come in these rickrack packs, that you have a little to spare, so a lot. You want to start with a pretty big tail out here, at least 1 inch, because you can see what it does, and you don't want that to be part of your design. So you're going to line it up with this outside line right there, and it's going to be, this is going to be placed on the inside of that line. And not that it would make much of a difference, but one thing I would do is maybe turn this corner and see if that looks good. Okay, that looks good. So I'm going to place it right there. And the nice thing about this is, even if your corners look kind of wonky, we're going to put a button over that. So that's okay. You can use a type of like repositionable fabric glue. I went ahead and just used a pin to pin these in place like that. Kind of pin over it because you can't really pin through it, it's too thick. And then when you get to the corner, you're just going to fold it. And like I said, it doesn't matter if it's not beautiful, but we're going to go all the way around, pinning it, and then fold in the corners over. And then when you come back down to the bottom, we'll pretend here, I'll give myself a little extra just so that I can show you. Okay, so pretend that's all pinned. So then you're going to cut this way and have it pinned. Now it's time to take your ecru thread, and we're going to do 3 strands just to make it a little more hefty. And you're just going to go right across the rickrack, just like that. These French knots I did after I put the batting on, and I did when I was doing my quilting. So we won't do the French knots right now. We're only putting the ecru thread over this rickrack. 3 strands. And, you know, if you want to save thread, you could take the needle down and then bring the needle up really close to it and over, down and up. Or you could go back and forth this way, but then you're going to be using more thread. But there should be enough to do that too, if you decide to do that. So once it is all stitched down, then you're going to come to this funky corner here. That is where you're going to actually trim these pieces. So I might trim it like right there, like that, and then I'd trim this one kind of around that same spot. Now you definitely want to put some fray check or any type of glue on the end so that it doesn't do this. And if you're wondering, well, how do I do that white or the ecru thread stitch over these corners that are so wonky? Just do a stitch over that to hold it in place, because like I said, there's going to be a nice big button that's going to cover those corners so you won't see that. So once that is all stitched down, then we get to start the quilting, which is, I think, what gives it a lot of life, and it kind of makes it feel a little older, gives it some character. And what I did is I just took flannel, because I didn't happen to have any batting. Let me grab my flannel. But I wanted it to be really light anyway. I didn't want something poofy. So if you have a piece of flannel or if you have a really light piece of batting, either way will work. So I put that on the back, and then I did my quilting. And I just did these little running stitches just around the tree triangles. And what I did is held out one of the reds, because I wanted enough of one of them to do all of the French knots in the same color. But you don't have to. You can mix it up if you want. So I used the other 2 thread colors, to do these running stitches around the trees. And then I took just regular quilting thread or sewing thread that matches the linen, and I just did a little quilting stitch around each of the little designs and around the trunks like that. And then added some beads and buttons, and I'll add some other things too. But so for right now, you've kind of got the basics. Oh, and that's also when you do these French knots. That's a lot of French knots. So that's the next step. So I'll work on that. So I wanted to show you some of the little options or things you could do if you want to mix this up a little bit. Especially if you ordered the kit, it comes with a few different things. So it comes with one of these cute little buttons, which I thought would be cute to sew onto the handle of that little guy there. You scooch in a little bit. And it also comes with some baker's twine that you can top some of the trees with if you want. Make these little bows. I just made a little bow and then I just whip stitched it in place. There's also the option of, instead of just doing beads for the snowballs, there's little sequins, little white ones in there, and you can put a sequin and a bead for the little snowballs. Now, if you're doing this pattern and you don't have the beads, you can always just do little French knots for the snowballs. So that's always an option. You can add other beads too. Like here's a little red bead. It's just kind of fun adding a few different things. Here I added some rickrack. This is pretty small. This is a 1/4 inch, and I just used the red floss to go over it. I did go ahead and when I cut it, I used some frayed check or fabric glue on the ends so that it wouldn't get all frayed. So that's just a couple ideas. I also took one of the beads. I had an extra bead, so I put it in the middle of a snowflake. So, and here's some more rickrack. So if you think of anything else, feel free to add it on, because it's kind of fun to add different little things to really make it your own. And then if you do, I'd love it if you posted pictures so I could see. So I haven't sewn these buttons on yet because those are done after the backing is put on. So I'm going to press this to get rid of any of these extra lines. I'm going to be very careful pressing around the sequins because I don't believe you should probably heat those. The next thing you want to do is figure out how you're going to trim up your finished piece. You want it to be 3/4 of an inch past this edge of the rickrack. But because you've sewn on it, it's kind of squeezed in a little bit. So even though, I say it should be 13.5 by 17, it might not be. I also say that. It's okay if it's not. What we want to do is just make sure that it's squared up and that you have a 3/4 inch on each side. So I like to use my nice big ruler and a friction pen. And if you can see here, I had to erase my first line and move it over a little bit because I needed to get it squared up. So by using this, like if I'm trying to do this line, I can line up my gauge here with the line that's already on each side to make sure that that's square before I draw that, if that makes sense to you. So I will cut this, and then I will also trim away the extra flannel or batting, whatever you choose to use, because we don't want it to make the seam all lumpy. So I'm going to trim it back quite a ways. So I'll trim that now. And this is always the scary part. I've only trimmed at the finished piece wrong one time, and that was enough. I don't ever want to have that happen again. So I like to be really, really careful before I start. That looks good. One thing I like to do is put my little finger over the edge, and what it does is it kind of holds that in place so that it won't slip over to the other side. I don't want it cut. I didn't go on that. Didn't do that very well. Let me try that again. There we go. That's why I always cut towards the outside too. Then I just take my scissors and I would trim away just the flannel. just like 1/2 inch. Just be sure not to cut through your linen on the front side. And it doesn't have to be beautiful, as you can see. So just like that, go ahead and trim this flannel or batting down. For the backing, you're going to need a fat quarter, which is about 18 by 22 inches. And you're going to cut it into 2 pieces that are 9 by 13.5 and 2 pieces that are 4 by 4. So you will need to think about how you cut those out so that you'll have the 4 by 4. Now we're going to take the 2 9 by 13.5 pieces, and we're going to sew them together along the 13.5 inch side using a 1/2 inch seam, and we're going to switch to a basting stitch the center few inches, and make sure you back stitch front and back, and then we'll press that to one side. On these, we're going to fold them wrong sides together to make 2 little triangles. Okay, and these will be in the corners so that you can put your dowel in there or skewer or whatever to hold your little design up on your wall. Here's the backing piece stitched together. So I sewed that using a 1/2 inch seam. Oop, didn't press that right. And I switched to a basting stitch in the middle and back stitched and press it to one side. Then in what will be the top, this is the top of the project, so this is the top of the back, I sewed the triangles on just using a scant 1/4 inch seam. Now we're going to sew these 2 pieces together, right sides together, and I would suggest having this embroidery piece on top. As I mentioned before, because there's so much stitching on this piece, it might not be quite the same size as your backing piece. This looks pretty good, but the best thing to do would be to stitch using a 1/4 inch seam following the edge of your linen, not the backing, because you want that to be an even amount along the front side. So the next thing you do is you're going to pin it, and we're going to sew that with a 1/4 inch seam all the way around. Don't leave an opening. This is the fun part. It really does work. I think it's a great way to finish things, because whenever I've tried to like turn something and then hand stitch that closed, it never looks quite as good. So here I'm looking at my backing. It's not quite as big. So I'm going to just center it. There's still plenty of room. So I'm going to catch it. That's the important thing. I just want to catch it. Okay. That looks pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and pin this and sew all the way around following the linen. And then we'll turn right side out. As you can see, I didn't correct this, but so just ignore that. So what I've done is I've trimmed the corners, the excess seam allowance there, and I've taken out these basting stitches. So now I can just reach through here and turn the whole thing right side out. Right through that little hole. And that's why it's important to back stitch at the beginning and end of that, because you are putting a little pressure on that opening and you don't want the seam to completely come out. Let's see. Okay, there we go. We want this triangle to be on the back and not the front. And your typical skewers are actually just the right length if you happen to have one in your kitchen, or you can just use a dowel. They also are good for poking out the corners. Get those all nice and squared away, and then we'll press it. And then there's really only one more thing to do, which is really easy. Just pick up the thread, the red thread that you have the most of left, and do a simple running stitch all the way around the edge on the other side on the front side of it. So, and see, this is going to be super simple since it was pressed to one direction. I'm going to press that again. It'll be really easy to just hand stitch that closed. So now it's nicely finished on all four sides. And now I can go ahead and sew these 4 buttons on and then do my, once it's pressed here, I'll do my little running stitches right along the edge, just about 1/8 of an inch in from the edge, and that will help keep it nice and flat. And then all you have to do is insert your dowel or your skewer to hang it. It might need a, just a little tack right there with some thread so that it doesn't sag. Or you can always do your typical sleeve that goes all the way across too. That's completely up to you, but I actually found a different way to hang it. I use these cute little clothespins, and that's how I'm going to hang mine. So I'll go ahead and press this, and it's almost done. And it is all finished. It was really fun to add some extra things that I didn't add the first time, like the sequins, and I did the little baker's twine bows. I put a little bead in the sequin. I think that, you know, those little additions really, really make a statement. I like that. There's that little button. So I can't wait to see what you do with yours. Please feel free to tag me if you post it online. I would love to see it. And if you like these videos, please hit the little like button. And if you'd like to see more, go ahead and subscribe. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Happy stitching!